Hi there everyone, and welcome to this video on my PowerPoint, What Comes Next, the necessary beats of plot and character arc. The point of this video is to present these necessary beats in fictional storytelling, whether that is a movie or a book or even a short story. When it comes to plotting a story, every writer has heard there has to be a beginning, middle, and end, but the necessary islands between those three large continents can be fuzzy. What exactly happens between the beginning and the middle and the end? What kinds of characters is the protagonist supposed to meet as he or she goes forward? How does a writer create highs and lows of story that ultimately amount to something, instead of just having, scenario? How do authors ensure that the whole of a story is more than the sum of its parts? One answer is in the successful established plot and character structures. And so this PowerPoint is going to focus on 15 necessary beats of plot and 12 necessary beats of a protagonist's character arc that ensure a story appropriately and effectively functions. These beats can be found in nearly every movie and every book, whether the genre is literature, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, thriller, or romance. And even if one ends up breaking the rules and conventions, it's important to know them. Okay, so in order to get across these beats of plot and character arc, I'm going to be using these two books and relating them to you and showing how they can be found in two separate movies, which is The Guardians of the Galaxy and Get Out. So the first one is Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, and it's actually a book on how to write screenplays. It was a bestseller for about 15 years, and it's been used by screenwriters around the world. It's fast, and it's funny, and it's one of many screenwriting books out there that's become canon. And Snyder gives real advice that writers can apply right away. And it's advice that can be used over and over again, but doesn't become old, right? A story can still feel fresh even as it has all 15 of his beats in it. One of my creative writing professors, Nancy Holder, said there's a big difference between writing one book and writing many. She actually uses these two books for every book she writes, and she has novelized, for instance, the new Wonder Woman movie that came out a few years ago, the all-female Ghostbusters. She's written, I believe, for Buffy, maybe Supernatural, and so she says that with her own books or with books that are novelizing movies, these are the two books she uses to guide her. Okay. And the writer's journey actually pioneered the hero's journey as a plotting template. Joseph Campbell is the one who came up with the hero's journey when he studied mythology and archetypes in his book Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is also very much worth reading, but is more like documentation of various stories from various cultures. And so this third edition of the writer's journey takes writers beyond the hero's journey concepts a little bit and follows the hero's journey plot structure, but also works with the three-act model, Aristotle's incline, and so on. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward, and we're going to start with Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. And you will see that there are 15 beats on the left-hand side: opening image, theme stated, setup, catalyst, debate, break into two, B story, fun and games, midpoint, bad guys close in, all is lost, dark night of the soul, break into three, finale, and final image. And these beats are based off of a 110-page script. And if you are, for instance, writing a 200-page book, you would simply double the page number that he lists each one should happen on, because he's very specific at what point in the script each one of these should happen. Okay, so we're going to venture forward into Guardians of the Galaxy and Get Out based on these 15 beats. And the very first one that Snyder mentions is the opening image. It's the very first impression of what a movie or book is. It can potentially provide a quote-unquote before snapshot of the protagonist. The opening image has a matching beat, which is the final image of the movie. And these are bookends for the movie. The opening and final images should be opposites, a plus and minus, showing change so dramatic it documents the emotional upheaval that the movie represents. So, in Guardians of the Galaxy, what we start off with is an image of Peter Quill alone, listening to his cassette tape that his mother made him. He is in a hospital, and he has no friends around him. All of his family members are in his mother's hospital room, and she is passing away. By the end of the movie, you also have a cassette tape that he's about to listen to, and he does end up listening to it. And it's volume 2 of Awesome Mix, right? So in the first image, he's listening to volume 1. The second one is volume 2, which gives the viewer a sense that, of course, there's going to be a sequel to this movie. But it also shows how his life has changed, because as he's listening to the second cassette tape, he is surrounded by his new friends, the Guardians of the Galaxy. When we see or look at the movie Get Out, the opening image is actually Andre Hayworth, an African-American man venturing around an affluent but pretty spooky suburb. He's searching for a house, but he's lost. And he tells the person he's talking to on the other end of the phone that he, sticks out like a sore thumb, quote unquote, referring to the neighborhood around him. Then he starts being followed by a car that has a creepy 1930s song playing in it. And he attempts to sidestep this vehicle, but he is kidnapped and dragged into the car. By the end of the movie, we also see a car approach the protagonist of the film, which is Chris. And this is when he has escaped the Armitage's house. He has managed to free himself. He's killed all of the individuals who have attempted to kill him. And a police car approaches, which there is an equal amount of terror in seeing that as there was in the kidnapping in the first image, because you know as a viewer that there is no way a random police officer who sees Chris amidst all of these dead bodies is going to believe that he is anything but a villain, and is potentially going to step out of the car and shoot him just immediately, no questions asked. As it turns out, of course, it is Chris's friend, Rod, from the TSA, who has come to save him. And so it's the polarity, right? Kidnapping versus saving in that first and last, similar to Guardians, which is no friends, listening to music, and then, 5 good friends while listening to music. I think it's 5, it might be 4. Okay, so the next thing that happens in a story is that the theme is stated, and this occurs within the first 5 minutes or so, around the first 15 pages of a 300-page novel. And what happens is usually a character, not the main character, will pose a question or make a statement that is the theme of the movie or book. The theme won't be obvious. It will be conversational, an offhand remark that has far-reaching and meaningful impact later. A book or screenplay is, in many ways, an argument posed by the writer. My creative writing professor, Nancy Holder, would say that the 3-act structure is thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis, right? So in Guardians of the Galaxy, this is when Peter Quill goes to talk to his mother on her deathbed, and he's going to say goodbye to her. Peter's mother asks about his black eye, and he tells her that some kids squished a frog and killed it for no reason, and so he was trying to defend the frog. And so this shows that deep down, Peter Quill is a protector, even though he may not realize it until later. And his mother hands him the final gift, which he won't open until the end of the movie. That's that volume 2 of music. And she tells him that he reminds her of his father, who was an angel from the stars. And she tells Peter that his father will come to get him one day soon. And she admonishes him to hold her hand as she passes. But he's too afraid, and he pulls back and refuses to take her hand, and he ends up running away. And so his quest is learning to have courage to trust others, and only by doing so will he be able to conquer the greatest threat the galaxy knows. In contrast, when it comes to Get Out's theme, I think there are 2 areas probably where it can be seen. The first is in the credit montage at the beginning with the title Get Out in sky blue letters and woods blurring past. There is a song playing in the background, which actually is in Swahili and roughly translates to "listen to your ancestors," as the song's lyrics warn that something bad is going to come, run. And so the theme is spoken to the main character mostly without knowing what is said that will be vital to him surviving. But in addition, on his way to Rose's house, Chris gets a call from his friend Rod at the TSA. And Rod, throughout the movie, pretty much regularly warns him that going to his girlfriend's house is just a bad idea. But in the very beginning, Rod warns specifically that the elderly are going to cause the next 9/11, and that they're looking for fresh bodies to inhabit, right? They're going to cause the next worldly disaster. And it's true. It turns out to be true, right? The elderly do end up being the issue here. And so you have this hidden joke that the elderly are going to cause the next 9/11. But it's correct. And so the theme is stated in the beginning of the movie in a way that you don't recognize it until much later. Okay. So then we have the setup, and this is the first 10 pages or so of a screenplay, first 20 or so of a book. This is the make it or break it section. The writer should have introduced every character in the A story, so that's the main core story, planted every character tick, every behavior a character needs to change in order to win. This is where the writer provides the 6 things that need fixing, the laundry list of problems that you must show an audience what is missing in the hero's life. This is also the calm before the storm, but there is a sense in the setup that a storm is about to hit. So, in Guardians of the Galaxy, as Peter hurries outside the hospital, a beam of light shines onto him, and it beams him into the craft above, and he's taken from the planet. 26 years later, he's on a planet called Morog, searching for a valuable orb. In a kind of Raiders of the Lost Ark-esque moment, he gets the orb, which he hopes to sell to an interested buyer. He's confronted, though, by Korath, a servant of Ronan, with others desiring to obtain this object. Quill knows it might be worth a lot, and he escapes Korath and returns to his ship. He, on his ship, tells his mentor Yondu about the orb, but instead of sharing it with Yondu, he betrays him to go collect money for himself. So once again, kind of going it alone. Okay, so then in Get Out, after the unsettling title sequence, we find ourselves in the apartment of Chris. And he's a photographer. We kind of get a lot of images of his photography, and we see that he has a really good eye. In the background, Chris is listening to a song by Childish Gambino. And the lyrics of the song tell the listener to stay woke, which echoes the theme in the title sequence. And so Rose comes over, and they're supposed to go to her parents' house, right, to meet her parents for the first time. She reveals to him that she has not told her parents that he is not white, that he's African American. She, however, assures Chris that her parents are uber liberal and would have voted for Obama for a third presidential term if he'd run. Rose says that Chris has nothing to worry about. And so Chris has these reservations, and there's this question of, is he going to listen to them or not, right? And of course, he doesn't. And so they go on the road. The next thing that Snyder says needs to happen is the catalyst, which occurs around page 12. And so after you've told us what the world is like, it's now time to knock it all down. The catalyst is not what it seems. It's the opposite of good news, and yet by the time the adventure is over, it's what leads the hero to happiness. It's the first moment when something happens. So basically, up until this point in your story, you have shown the reader how the world would continue if the catalyst were not to happen. So we kind of get a sense of what the world is like, and now it's time to kind of break that world apart. Okay, so in Guardians of the Galaxy, this is when Quill tries to sell the orb to his buyer on Xandar, but when he reveals that one of Ronan's servants was also after it, the buyer does not want to buy it and pushes Quill out. Outside, Gamora meets him and she steals the orb. Okay, so his plans have been obliterated, and she takes the orb from him right before they're all arrested. So in Get Out, this is when Rose and Chris are headed to her parents' house, and they hit a deer as it darts across the road. And the dying doe moans somewhere in the woodline, and Chris leaves the car to check it out. He's crossing a threshold here that is not normal for him, and he finds the deer. It visibly affects him, and at first it seems like this might be empathy toward the dying animal, but we learn later that what happened here is much more deep-seated in Chris's mind, because his mother had actually passed away when she was hit by a car when he was a child, and she was left dying in the street. And he felt very guilt-stricken by this because he did not go to try to find her. He was too scared to do so, too scared to go out beyond the apartment and try to find her and save her. He was only 10 at the time, but he blames himself. Okay. So now we have the debate section after the catalyst. So the world is broken apart, and the debate is when the protagonist actually asks himself, am I going to keep going with this, right? This is crazy, but am I going to continue? So the debate section is the last chance for the hero to say, this is crazy, and we need him or her to realize that. Should I go? Dare I go? Sure, it's dangerous out there, but what's my choice? Stay here? The debate section must ask a question of some kind. So in Guardians of the Galaxy, after the Nova arrest, each of the group is sent to the Kiln, a space prison. And in the prison, Quill and the other members of their eventual group are out of their element, except for Rocket, who has escaped from prison multiple times. The debate section includes the entire time that they work as individuals. They try to work alone, and where does it get them? It gets them in jail. And so the debate is whether or not these characters can come together, especially Star-Lord or Quill, and coexist as a group to survive. And Quill answers that question with a hard yes, as evident by the scene where Groot protects him from being another inmate's prison wife. So Quill literally declares, I'm with them. And from there, the group chooses to put their differences aside and start planning their literal breakout. And they do break out of prison successfully as a group. In terms of Get Out, Chris goes and meets Rose's parents at the house, and it's all quite awkward and strange. So they find out about the accident with the deer, and Dean Armitage, the father of Rose, states that he would wipe out all the deer if he could, that they're awful animals and he despises them. This is off-putting, but his wife, Missy, steps in and says what everyone else is thinking, which is, that's weird, let's move on. And so she kind of releases that tension, right? And you're willing to put it aside for the moment. That being said, Armitages are living in an affluent country mansion, and they're secluded in a thick forest. And though Rose's parents, Dean and Missy, are pretty accommodating, Chris is unsettled by the fact that they have two African Americans working for them. One is Georgina, the maid, and one is Walter, the groundskeeper. Dean Armitage assures Chris that it's not how it looks. He wants to keep Georgina and Walter employed with the family after his parents died. And Dean also mentions how his father, Roman Armitage, lost to Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics. And he states he almost got over it. Missy notices that Chris is fidgeting at the table a little bit. He's a smoker who's having nicotine withdrawals, and Missy lets him know that she is a hypnotherapist, and she offers to hypnotize Chris to get rid of his unhealthy habit. Dean says Missy hypnotized him when he was a smoker, and he stopped smoking immediately. A little unsettled about someone poking around in his head, Chris ends up declining. But we're given this, further proof that this family is just very weird and probably untrustworthy. Chris chooses to stay, and part of the reason is that whatever the parents are like, he still firmly has trust in Rose, right? She seems to be the link here. And since Rose is still not weird, he's willing to let the family be weird. All right, so the next piece is the break into two, and this is the act break. It's the moment where we leave the old world, the thesis statement, behind and proceed into a world that is the upside down version of that. It's antithesis. So just like Nancy Holder said, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, we're now in the antithesis portion. And the hero cannot be lured, tricked, or drift into Act 2. The hero must make the decision himself, and that's what makes him a hero, being proactive. So in Guardians of the Galaxy, this is when Quill decides to escape by working with the others. He has chosen to take his first step in the threshold from being a rebellious loner to a team player who will ultimately become the team leader. And Quill answers that question with a hard yes. As evidenced by the scene where Groot protects him for becoming another inmate's prison wife, and he says, "I'm with them." And then from there, the group chooses to put their differences aside and break out. Quill also chooses to help band all of them together, partially by convincing Drax not to kill Gamora. In terms of Get Out, this is later on in the movie when Rose is a little off-put by her parents being kindly condescending to Chris. Later, Chris wakes up in the middle of the night, still wanting a cigarette, and he goes downstairs to smoke. And here's where we leave the brightly lit thesis world behind and enter into the upside-down antithesis world of the Act 2. It's dark and creepy, and made more so when Chris goes outside to smoke and sees Walter running right toward him in a mad sprint. And then, after Walter barely runs by him through the window, Chris sees Georgina looking at herself in the mirror in a very odd way, as though she is admiring herself in a way that she's not identified with herself, if that makes sense. So something weird is going on here, and he's very reluctant but still compelled. And he sneaks back into the house, and he is caught by Missy, who's sitting in the room. And she insists he take a seat, which he does. And she starts harping a little bit on his smoking, and she tells him that it's harming her child's body, basically, whenever she's inhaling that secondhand smoke. And she has a cup of tea, which she's gently stirring with a spoon, and the effect is hypnotic. She starts asking questions about Chris's past, and that's when we learn that he was 11 years old at home, watching TV when his mother was killed by a hit-and-run driver and left dying in the road. So that explains Chris's interest and horror and, just all of the emotions he felt when he saw Rose hit the deer. Chris has a nervous habit of scratching his nails into wood, which he does in the arms of the chair that he's in. And as he's talking to Missy, she hypnotizes him, and he falls down into what she calls the sunken place. And it's a dark void somewhere in Chris's mind where he can only see what's happening out of a tiny rectangular window, and he's powerless to do anything. Okay, so we have had a very serious shift in the world. And to kind of cover that over, this is when the story moves to the B story. So this is not the core story. This is not the A story. It's often known as the love story, and it is the booster rocket that helps smooth over the shockingly obvious A story act break. The B story provides a breather. It's slightly off theme, and the B story is also very often a brand new bunch of characters that we haven't been dealing with prior to this moment, and they are the antithesis creatures. So in Guardians of the Galaxy, at first hating Gamora, Quill starts to develop feelings for her, and this is part of the B story. But the larger B story will focus on the group as a whole, as they come together and learn to trust one another and to show the courage that is necessary to do what is right. In terms of Get Out, Rod is the one who's the helper story, and he carries the theme. Typically, this is the love story, of course, and Rose even makes jokes in the movie about being in a love triangle between Rod, her, and Chris, which annoys Chris. Rod tells Chris not to go as a general rule, never go to a white girlfriend's parents' house, echoing the theme of, quote-unquote, something bad will come. Chris ignores this, and this is his quote-unquote sin, which will later allow the monster to thrive in the story. Rod is the voice of the audience and adds humor, which helps relieve us from much of the story's suffocating tension. So, after all of this strange stuff happens with the Armitages, that's when Chris calls Rod, and Rod continues to warn him and tells him to get out. Right, to leave. All right, now we've hit the fun and games section. So this section provides, quote unquote, the promise of the premise. It is the core and essence of the movie's poster. It's where we aren't as concerned with the forward progress of the story. The fun and games section answers the question, why did I come to see this movie? What about this premise, this poster, this movie idea is cool? So the fun and games section is actually in Guardians of the Galaxy, the entire sequence after the group breaks out of prison and they're waiting to see the Collector. It's a party, as Snyder would say. The characters get drunk and gamble. Peter has a romantic scene with Gamora, and we get to know more about the characters and the MacGuffin Infinity Stone. The plot doesn't really kick back in until the Infinity Stone explodes and Ronan shows up. In terms of Get Out, the fun and games section is when Chris wakes up the next morning a little unsettled, and he tells her he thinks her mom hypnotized him. Rose then notices a lot of expensive black cars, like a funeral procession, actually, rolling up the drive. She forgets that it's her parents' special weekend that they have every year. Affluent, elderly white people emerge from the cars. They each meet Chris, and they all admire him in really odd ways and make unusual comments about his blackness that makes him uncomfortable. Um, and Chris has his camera with him to use as a kind of social shield. Um, and he, walks up to one man who's dressed in really outdated garb. And he's the only other man there that's African American. And he introduces himself as Logan King. And he is with an older white woman, Philomena King. And Chris is really puzzled by Logan's domestic behavior and demeanor. It's a very odd scene, and Logan is acting very weird. In addition, at this party, Chris meets Jim Hudson, who is a respected art gallery owner in the city. Jim is blind, and he is the only one at this party that treats Chris like a human being. And that art dealer tells him he wishes he had Chris's gift to make compelling images. And Jim says he'd love to do a show of Chris's photographs, which would be a boon to Chris's career. With all this strange socializing being a bit too much, Chris goes upstairs to the guest bedroom he's staying in, and he finds that his phone is unplugged and almost out of juice. The question becomes who unplugged it and why. So now we've hit the midpoint. And the midpoint is a point halfway where there is either an up, where the hero seemingly peaks, although it's a false peak, or a down, where the world collapses all around the hero, though it is a false collapse. At the midpoint, the stakes are raised. It's the point where the fun and games are over and it's back to the story. The midpoint corresponds with the all is lost point, in that it's never as good as it seems to be at the midpoint, and it's never as bad as it seems to be at the all is lost point, or vice versa. So in Guardians of the Galaxy, this is when the Infinity Stone explodes and Ronan shows up. Tivan opens the orb, revealing an Infinity Stone, an item of immeasurable power that destroys all but the most powerful beings who wield it. Karina grabs the stone, triggering an explosion that engulfs Tivan's archive. In terms of Get Out, the midpoint is when Chris goes back upstairs to call his best friend. And Chris tells Rod that Missy may have hypnotized him last night and that meeting Logan King was weird. And Rod, always the TSA officer, has a bit of a suspicious and conspiratorial side and explains to Chris what's going on, that Black people are being hypnotized by Missy and being turned into sex slaves. So Rod goes into a hilarious analogy about serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer and his victims, which shouldn't be funny, but it kind of is. And this makes Rod's explanation of what's going on seem pretty freaking crazy, right? Chris hangs up and he discovers that his phone has been unplugged, and so he's nearly out of battery. And that's when Georgina shows up, and she is the one who unplugged it. I suspect that the midpoint is probably this moment where Chris goes upstairs, because what we have is an image of the party, and they actually watch him go upstairs unbeknownst to him, and as soon as he goes upstairs, they are dead silent. And it's a very eerie scene because there are lots of them, and they just immediately go quiet. Meanwhile, upstairs, when Chris is talking to Georgina, she explains that she was dusting around the room and may have accidentally unplugged Chris's phone. When Chris tries to speak with Georgina, who's acting bizarre, he gets an eerie vibe from her, like she's struggling with something deep inside of her. And we have this really quite fantastic acting, where she is both smiling and crying at the same time. We have this split self here. So it's as though the mask is falling off in the movie, right? All right, bad guys close in. This is a point where the bad guys decide to regroup and send in the heavy artillery. The forces that are aligned against the hero, internal and external, tighten their grip. Evil is not giving up, and there's nowhere for the hero to go for help. He is on his own and must endure. The main character is headed for a huge fall. In Guardians of the Galaxy, this is when Quill and others escape, with Quill saying that the stone needs to be taken to Nova headquarters where it will be safe. As they escape, they are confronted by Ronan and Nebula, along with other ships. In his desire for revenge, Drax had summoned Ronan. Gamora attempts to escape in a ship and is pursued by Nebula. Meanwhile, Drax meets his match in Ronan and is bested by him. Nebula pursues Gamora's ship and shoots it, expelling her and the stone from it. In Get Out, this would be when Chris takes his phone and goes back to join the party. When one of the guests asks Chris what the quote-unquote black experience is like, Chris defers the question over to the hat-wearing Logan, the boater hat-wearing Logan, in the strange attire, the outdated attire. And as Logan is fumbling his way with an explanation, Chris takes a picture of Logan with the flash on his phone. And Logan immediately stops talking and freezes like he's gone into a trance. And then, like he's awakened from being another person, Logan rushes up to Chris, his nose bleeding, and tells him to get out. Several of the guests rustle Logan and take him away to Missy's study. Chris takes Rose off to a quiet place by a lake and explains everything that's going on and that he needs to get out immediately. Rose is taken aback, not sure of what Chris is getting at, but Chris is determined he's leaving with or without her. And while Chris is with Rose, the group of garden party guests is playing bingo out by the gazebo. But it's not bingo, right? Dina Armitage stands in front of a framed picture of Chris. And the white people there, like in the slavery days of old, are actually bidding on him using their bingo cards. After a tense and ominous race to buy Chris, Jim Hudson, the blind art dealer, wins the bid. So it is the person who treated Chris most like a human being who wins the bid. Okay, so now we have the all is lost moment in a story. The all is lost moment is also called false defeat. Even though all looks hopeless, it's just temporary. All aspects of the hero's life are in shambles, wreckage abounds, and there is no hope. Snyder calls it the whiff of death. And all is lost is the place where mentors tend to go to die, presumably so their students can discover that they had it in them all along. The mentor's death clears the way to prove that. All good primal stories have this, and it resonates for a reason. In Guardians of the Galaxy, this is when Quill watches as Gamora's body is hurled into space, and Nebula obtains the orb for Ronan. Quill, using his mask, leaves his ship and calls Yondu, who is after him for being double-crossed. As Quill takes his mask off and gives it to Gamora so she can breathe, this means certain death for him. But he doesn't want her to die. And so it's sort of a self-sacrifice moment. At that same time, though, Yondu's ship arrives and abducts both of them, saving them. In terms of Get Out, this is when Chris returns to the house with Rose, and night has fallen, all of the affluent guests have left, and it's just the Armitage family again. And Chris texts the photo of Logan to Rod, and in the fastest response in movie history, Rod quickly calls back and says, "That's Dre." Rod explains that Logan King is actually Andre Hayworth, the man who was abducted in the opening sequence of the movie. This is the point of the story where the protagonist breaks down internally and externally. Chris now has confirmation that there's something definitely wrong, taking Rod's previous advice as well as Logan's, who told him to get out. It's time to leave as the stakes are raised and the clock starts ticking. Chris is finally awake. Chris tells Rose to pack, and as he does the same, he sees a closet door ajar that piques his curiosity. This time, he acts on his curiosity and looks inside. He finds a shoebox filled with photos of Rose with other African American people. In the setup, she said Chris was the first African American she'd ever dated. Apparently, that's not true. There's pictures of Walter with her, Andre with her, and Georgina with her. And they are all messed up, as we have seen throughout the movie. And so the question is, what is happening and what's going to happen to Chris? So Chris says they need to leave. He runs downstairs and Rose follows him. The problem is she, quote unquote, can't find her car keys, right? The Armitage family all congregate around him, and the only seemingly inviting the once seemingly inviting upscale home now has a sinister edge. And they do not seem happy-go-lucky anymore. They are very, what's the word? Sinister, right? Rose shows Chris that she actually had the keys all along, but she tells him she can't give him the keys, that they're not leaving. And so Chris tries to open the front door, and he's stopped by Jeremy, Rose's brother, who's been pretty violent throughout the film. Chris attempts to fight back against Jeremy, but Missy, who has, hypnotized him previously, uses the spoon in the teacup, and he is rendered helpless. He is down in the sunken place, and he is unconscious. He's able to view them from very, very far away through that tiny window. And what he sees is them dragging his body down to the basement. Okay, so this is the moment of false defeat for both Guardians of the Galaxy and Get Out. Now we have Dark Night of the Soul. And this is the middle of a death moment at the all is lost point. The darkness right before the dawn, it is the point just before the hero reaches way deep down and pulls out the last best idea that will save himself and everyone around him. It's the moment where the character admits his or her humility or humanity and yields control of events over to fate, gives up, and only then finds the answer. So in Guardians of the Galaxy, this is when all of the Guardians have congregated. Drax admits his pride caused their problems, and with Rocket and Groot, they confront Yondu, on his ship. And Quill tells Yondu that he has a plan to get the orb back from Ronan and needs the help of him and his men. Meanwhile, Ronan confronts Thanos and declares that he will use the Infinity Stone himself and destroy Xandar, and then will destroy Thanos. When Peter finally has time to speak with the other 4 companions, he reveals that he only has about 12% of a plan. They know that even if they try to stop Ronan, that it will most likely mean certain death for all of them. However, he has also realized that they are all a bunch of losers, individuals who have lost something in their lives. And right now they have a chance to do something good. And they all agree, and with Gamora stating that she has lived most of her life with her enemies and she would be honored to die amongst her friends. In terms of Get Out, this is when Chris wakes up from his unconsciousness in the basement of the Armitage's home. And it's kind of an antiquated rec room. It's very strange. There's a vintage television console in the middle of the room. Chris sits in the stuffed chair and his arms and legs are tied down. And so the television shows an explanation of what's happening to him. And it's basically that this group of mad scientists, Dean Armitage being the brain surgeon / mad scientist, they figured out a way to inhabit other people's bodies. And this group of people has decided that the superior physical body would be that of African Americans. So they have been inhabiting them. Right. And they call this the coagula procedure. After this video is shown, it shuts off, and then what comes on is actually the blind art dealer Jim Hudson. And it's sort of a live feed, and he tells Chris that he can ask him any questions he wants or say whatever he wants because it helps a sort of bonding procedure take place before Jim will inhabit Chris's body. And as it turns out, Jim really wanted him because he has an eye for photography, so he has superior skills, and Jim wants those skills. All right. So now we break into Act 3. This is the synthesis moment. This is where the hero has found the answer. The hero has prevailed, passed every test, and dug deep to find the solution. Now all he has to do is apply it. An idea to solve the problem has emerged. The world of synthesis is at hand. So in Guardians of the Galaxy, this is when Quill and the others prepare their plan of attack. They alert Nova, they face off against Ronan's ship, an aerial battle ensues. And then while the enemy ships dive bomb the city below, Rocket crashes his ship onto the bridge, saving Quill and the others. The Dark Aster falls to the surface below, and Groot begins to grow a giant cocoon around the other four. Rocket knows that this will mean the death of Groot, but Groot is willing to make the sacrifice. After the ship crashes, Quill and the others emerge from the wreckage, surrounded by the shattered remains of Groot's splintered form. Ronan stands before the people at the scene, laughing at them for looking toward these quote-unquote guardians of the galaxy, for thinking they could stop him from destroying the planet. Quill enacts a unique method of distracting Ronan by singing and dancing, but it works long enough to allow Drax and Rocket to fire a shot at him, knocking the Infinity Stone from him. Peter grabs it before Ronan can, and just like with the Collector's Servant, it begins to destroy him. All right, then in Get Out, this is where Chris's habit of drumming his fingers or scratching his chair when he's nervous ends up working for him. He's so nervous here, knowing he's going to literally lose his mind, that he tears the upholstery of the chair he's tied to, and stuffing comes spilling out of it. He bends over and uses the cotton stuffing to seal his ears so that way he cannot be hypnotized. He won't hear the spoon in the teacup anymore. And this is the new inspiration that gives Chris hope. And it's a perfect break into Act 3, where he starts fighting. All right, finale. This is Act 3. This is where we wrap it up. It's where the lessons learned are applied. It's where the character tics are mastered and the A and B story end in triumph for our hero. So turning over the old world and creation of a new world order, all thanks to the hero who leads the way based on what he experienced in the upside down or antithetical world of Act 2. It's not enough for the hero to triumph. He must change the world, and he must do it in an emotionally satisfying way. In Guardians of the Galaxy, this is when Peter grabs the Infinity Stone before Ronan can, which again, this is sort of a self-sacrifice moment because anyone who touches the stone, if they're not powerful enough, they're torn apart. Gamora urges Quill to take her hand while he's holding the stone, and Peter recalls his last moments with his mother and how he did not have the courage to take her hand when she was dying in the hospital. But this time he does have courage. So he reaches out and joins hands with Gamora. Drax takes his other hand and Rocket does so too. Soon they are able to control the power of the Infinity Stone together. They destroy Ronan and emerge victorious. And then back at Nova, Quill learns that he is only half human, and the fact that he was able to survive the Infinity Stone's power must mean that his father is also something more powerful and ancient. Rocket boards the ship with a stem from Groot's remains, and there are signs of renewed life emerging already. All right, in terms of Get Out, so Chris pretends that he is unconscious, that he has been placed back in the sunken place with the video of the spoon and teacup. Jeremy shows up in hospital scrubs to retrieve Chris for his brain surgery, and when Jeremy isn't looking, Chris clubs him over the head and kills him. And then he goes and he finds Dean Armitage. He grabs a buck head off the wall and impales Dean with the antlers, which of course is a callback to when Dean said he would kill every deer if he could, right? Chris goes upstairs, and upstairs, of course, is where Missy is. She attempts to grab the teacup and spoon to hypnotize him, but he gets there first and smashes it. She then attacks him with a letter opener, but Chris is able to best her with the weapon. And as Chris is heading out the door, that's when, of course, Jeremy, it turns out he's not dead. He shows up and attacks Chris. Using his intelligence, Chris is able to defeat Jeremy and put him down for the last time. He gets out of the house, and Chris jumps into Jeremy's sports car. As he turns over the ignition, that old-timey music plays on the stereo. In addition, weirdly enough, there's a knight's helmet in the passenger seat. As it turns out, it was Jeremy in the opening who had kidnapped Andre Hayworth. As Chris zooms away from the burning Armitage house, calling 911, Georgina appears in the headlights. He hits her, and this is a callback where he is reminded of his mother dying in the road, and he cannot leave Georgina behind. He can't do it. So he gets out of the car, he pulls her into the car. And she wakes up, and of course it's not really Georgina, it's the grandmother of Rose, and she attacks Chris. So the sports car hits a tree, it kills Georgina, and Chris crawls out of the car. So Rose now shows up. She's heard the commotion from her room, she runs out of the house, she has a gun with her, and her grandfather, who is in Walter's body, they both go after Chris. So first, Chris is attacked by Walter, and Chris pulls out his phone and takes a photo with the flash on Walter, who is able to wake up for a moment from being possessed, and he convinces Rose to give him the rifle so he can shoot Chris, and instead he shoots Rose. And then he shoots himself, unfortunately. So Rose is dying in the road, and Chris wants to make sure by this point that she is dead, that the Armitage legacy is finished, and so he starts to strangle her. And as he does, Rose smiles, and he realizes that she's enjoying this idea of his soul being gone, and that he'll lose his humanity if he kills her. So he stops, and he lets her simply die from her bullet wounds. Final image. Alright, so we've gone full circle, and the final image in a movie is the opposite of the opening image. It is proof that change has occurred and that it's real. In Guardians of the Galaxy, in his ship, Peter reads an old note from his mother in which she calls him, quote-unquote, my Star-Lord. He finally takes hold of the present his mother gave him. Opening it, he finds another cassette tape entitled Awesome Mix Volume 2. He smiles, and whereas at the start he was listening to the first tape in isolation, now he can listen to this one surrounded by his new friends as they take off to protect the galaxy. In Get Out, this is when Rod shows up in the police car. Red and blue lights flash and a siren sounds. It doesn't look good for Chris, an African-American man who has just killed a white woman in the middle of the road, especially since he had so much trouble from the police officer back when the deer was hit. So there was this scene with the police officer where he's a bit too inquisitive with Chris. And Rod gets out of the car, so Chris realizes he's not in danger, he's saved, and he gets into the police car with Rod. And Rod says that's what TSA does. We handle things, right? And and then he also says, basically, I told you not to go. I told you not to go to Rose's parents' house. So Chris and Rod drive away, leaving Rose to die on the road. Chris has dramatically transformed since the opening minutes of the film. He's sad and bloody, but he is wiser, and he survived with his body and soul intact. He got out. All right. So that was Blake Snyder's 15 beats. Now we're going to look at the 12 beats of the writer's journey. And this is more of an internal journey. It is the hero's journey based on mythology. And this analysis, don't worry, will be a bit shorter. Okay, so first beat is the ordinary world. Most stories take the hero out of the ordinary, mundane world and into a special world, new and alien. So if you're going to take the fish out of the water, you're going to first have to show him in that ordinary world to create a vivid contrast with the strange new world he is about to enter. The first chapter of most novels simply focuses on setting up the ordinary world. In Guardians of the Galaxy, this is, of course, when Quill is a young kid with a sick mother and an absentee father. He gets into fights at school and often listens to a playlist his mother made him. Quill's mother dies and leaves him a gift, which he doesn't open. Peter is then abducted by the Ravagers, a group of vicious space pirates, and they raise him into an adult. This is the ordinary world. In Get Out, the first 5 or so minutes of the movie is showing Chris's apartment, his world, and that includes his photography. He's an excellent artist with a good eye and has captured the world around him, which are the photographs on his wall. And he has a girlfriend. All right, so then we have the call to adventure, the call to leave the ordinary world. The hero is presented with a problem, challenge, or adventure to undertake. Once presented with a call to adventure, he or she can no longer remain indefinitely in the comfort of the ordinary world. The call to adventure establishes the stakes of the game and makes clear the hero's goal, which is to win the treasure or lover, to get revenge or right a wrong, to achieve a dream, confront a challenge, or change a life. In Guardians of the Galaxy, after discovering the Infinity Orb in another part of the galaxy, Quill is now the main target of a manhunt, led by the genocidal villain Ronan the Accuser. In Get Out, Chris's girlfriend Rose invites him to come and meet her family for the weekend at their home outside of the city. All right, next beat is refusal of the call, and this one is about fear. Often at this point, the hero balks at the threshold of adventure, refusing the call or expressing reluctance. After all, he or she is facing the greatest of all fears, terror of the unknown. The hero is not yet fully committed to the journey and may still be thinking of turning back. So in Guardians of the Galaxy, Quill first attempts to sell the orb and fails at that. Subsequently, he decides whether or not to turn in the orb to Ronan or protect it and bring it to the Nova Corps. In Get Out, Chris is reluctant to visit Rose's family because he does not know how they will react when they discover that he is a different race, that he is African American, since Rose has not told them. All right. So now we have the meeting of the mentor. By this time, many stories will have introduced a Merlin-like character who is the hero's mentor. The relationship between hero and mentor is one of the most common themes in mythology and one of the richest in its symbolic value. It stands for the bond between parent and child, teacher and student, doctor and patient, God and man. The function of the mentors is to prepare the hero to face the unknown. However, eventually the hero must face the unknown alone. And actually, in that second bullet point where it says God and man, interestingly enough, in Get Out, Rod is like God and Chris is like Christ. So it's a bit like God to Christ. In Guardians of the Galaxy, being hunted across the galaxy, Quill gets lumped together with a group of misfits that need to learn how to get along before they can become quote-unquote Guardians of the Galaxy. But these are essentially his mentors. In Get Out, on his way to Rose's parents' house, Chris receives a call from his friend Rod, who regularly warns Chris throughout the movie with ridiculous assertions that turn out to be true, including his first one that the elderly are going to cause the next worldly disaster. As it turns out, that is what Chris is facing. Those who are elderly are looking for fresh bodies to inhabit. All right, now we have crossing the first threshold. The hero is finally committed to the adventure and fully enters the special world of the story for the first time by crossing the first threshold. He or she agrees to face the consequences of dealing with the problem or challenge posed in the call to adventure. This is the moment when the story takes off. Heroes don't always land gently. They may crash in the other world, literally or figuratively. Oftentimes, there are threshold guardians blocking the way. So in Guardians of the Galaxy, Quill and his friends must band together and bust out of the prison. There is a huge threshold guardian for them to defeat. In Get Out, on the way to the Armitages, a deer jumps out in front of Rose and Chris and they hit it. Chris wanders into the woods to see it. Though Rose and the audience do not know it, the scene is extra traumatizing for Chris since his mother died due to a car hitting her. But the point is that there is this crashing across the threshold. All right, now we have tests, allies, and enemies. Once across the first threshold, the hero naturally encounters new challenges and tests, makes allies and enemies, and begins to learn the rules of the special world. Scenes like these allow for character development as we watch the hero and his companions react under great stress. In Guardians of the Galaxy, this is when Peter becomes more familiar with his new allies, Gamora, Drax, Rocket, and Groot. He also learns more about the evil and vengeful villain Ronan, who wants to use the orb to destroy the world. Peter and Drax fight off Ronan and Nebula, who want to bring the orb back to Thanos, Nebula's father. Peter ends up leading the army on a wild goose chase to distract them so Gamora can escape. Peter also has a quote-unquote meeting with the goddess, which is Gamora. They bond over discussing his Walkman. Peter does ultimately have atonement with his father, Yondu. Yondu is Peter's father figure, and then even though the group is all full of thieves, they band together and protect the planet from being annihilated. In Get Out, this is when Chris meets the Armitages, learning about their interests, family history, including the fact that Dina Armitage's father used to run and competed in the Olympics. And he meets their help, Walter and Georgina, people who have been part of the family for a while and who have highly unusual quirks. Chris learns that Dean is a neurosurgeon, and Missy, the mother, is a hypnotherapist who is very anti-smoking and offers to help Chris with his addiction. Finally, Chris meets Rose's brother, Jeremy, who is violent and offensive. Chris also is hypnotized by Missy and encounters very unusual people who are friends of the Armitages and who take keen interest in him. He ultimately decides to leave and discovers that Rose has brought him there for a specific purpose and that she is in on whatever her family has planned. All right, so now we have approach to the inmost cave. This is when the hero comes at last to the edge of a dangerous place, sometimes deep underground where the object of the quest is hidden. Often it's the headquarters of the hero's greatest enemy, the most dangerous spot in the special world. When the hero enters the special place, he will cross the second major threshold. Heroes often pause at the gate to prepare, plan, and outwit the villain's guards. In Guardians of the Galaxy, this is when Gamora's ship gets destroyed by her sister Nebula. Peter risks his life as he goes out to save her, and after Peter reaches Gamora, Yondu arrives, capturing them both, and Peter starts scheming a greater plan. This is the inmost cave. It's where they create a plan to take that final step and leap into the final battle against Ronan. In Get Out, this is when Chris is dragged into the unconscious of himself by the sound of Missy's teacup and her hypnotism. While unconscious, the family takes him into the belly of the house, kind of like a labyrinth, where he is going to be prepped for a new mind to inhabit him and take over. All right, now we have the ordeal. Here the fortunes of the hero hit bottom in a direct confrontation with his greatest fear. He faces the possibility of death and is brought to the brink in a battle with a hostile force. The ordeal is a moment for the audience where they are held in suspense and tension, not knowing if the hero will live or die. He is in the belly of the beast. In Guardians, the supreme ordeal is the most dangerous tasks, where Peter realizes his real call to adventure, which is to protect the galaxy from Ronan. Peter, the Guardians, Yondu's crew, and Nova Corps join together to protect the galaxy, while Ronan is en route to destroy the galaxy and everything in his path. Pivotal moments of the battle with Ronan take place on the ground when Quill encounters him, and this scene is a bit more comical than other Marvel movies by Peter distracting Ronan and challenging him to a dance contest. This shows the greater power and insight that is necessary to fulfill Peter's destiny. In Get Out, Chris is forced to kill all of the Armitages, one by one, as he makes his way out of the house, using what he has learned to stop Missy from using her teacup against him, killing Dean and Jeremy. Jeremy proves to be the most difficult, and Chris almost doesn't make it out. All right, reward for seizing the sword. Having survived death, beaten the dragon, or slain the Minotaur, hero and audience have cause to celebrate. The hero now takes possession of the treasure she has come seeking, or her reward. It might be a special weapon like a magic sword, or a token like the Grail, or some elixir which can heal the wounded land. Sometimes the sword is knowledge, an experience that leads to greater understanding and reconciliation with hostile forces. So in Guardians, the pivotal moments of the battle take place on the ground. When Peter encounters Ronan, challenges him to a dance battle, which distracts him, and Peter grabs the Infinity Stone. And then this is where they all join together to take on the power of the Infinity Stone, and essentially either die together or survive together. In this case, it's surviving. In Get Out, Chris is able to steal a vehicle and begin driving away from the Armitages. Oddly enough, he finds a strange medieval mask in the passenger seat of the car, and this hints at potentially the idea of having slayed a dragon, which is Jeremy. All right, the road back. The hero is not quite out of the woods yet. The hero begins to deal with the consequences of confronting the dark forces of the ordeal. If she has not yet managed to reconcile with the parent, the gods, or the hostile forces, they may come raging after her. Some of the best chase scenes spring up at this point as the hero is pursued on the road back by the vengeful forces. She is disturbed by seizing the sword, the elixir, or the treasure. So this is not so present in Guardians, but it is definitely present in Get Out. On Chris's journey back on the road away from the Armitages, he accidentally hits Georgina and, of course, unable to leave her because it reminds him of leaving his mother, or the idea of abandoning his mother. He puts her in the car. She wakes up and attacks him. And then simultaneously, Rose and her grandfather, who's in, Walter, who's in the body, right, of Walter, chase after Chris. And Chris must use what he has learned to use his phone's flash to awaken Walter, or whoever is inhabiting Walter, so that he will stop attacking him. Walter does, and asks Rose for the gun. He shoots her and then himself, and Chris finally turns against Rose. All right, resurrection. The hero has been to the realm of the dead and must be reborn and cleansed in one last ordeal. resurrection. This is often a second life and death moment, almost a replay of the death and rebirth of the ordeal. It's kind of a final exam for the hero who must be tested once more to see if he has really learned the lessons of the ordeal. The hero is transformed by these moments of death and rebirth and is able to return to ordinary life, reborn as a new being with new insights. In Guardians, Quill is no longer afraid to open his mother's gift. He does so and discovers a new mixtape, signifying the adventure continues with lessons learned. In Get Out, the mentor Rod meets Chris, having gone through his own journey to save him. He reminds Chris that he told him not to go to the Armitages, and he reiterates Chris's lesson. Chris asks how Rod found him, and Rod is kind of godlike and says, "This is what the TSA does. We handle things. Consider this handled." Rose dies on the road as the two drive off. All right, return with the elixir. This is the last point. The hero returns to the ordinary world, but the journey is meaningless unless she brings back some elixir, treasure, or lesson from the special world. The elixir is the magic potion with the power to heal. It may be a great treasure like the Grail, or it might simply be knowledge or experience that could be useful to the community someday. So, in Guardians, there's actually a refusal of the return to their homes. The characters start a new life together on the spaceship, and this is the benefit to the ordinary world. There are these guardians here to protect it. And Get Out, the movie's beginning music returns. On the soundtrack, some eerie, disembodied voices chant the words, the Swahili words, that, roughly translate to "listen to your ancestors, run, something bad will come." And this reiterates Chris's lesson and the lesson he has for his community. Thank you so much for watching this PowerPoint to the end.